Love podcasts, hate nonsense. It's the PoliticsJOE podcast, ladies and gentlemen. I'm joined by Laura.
Hello.
Cuts Laura. And fresh from his trip from the Atlantic City boardwalk.
It's actually
Seán
the
Hickey.
Bahamas.
Oh, from the Bahamas.
Yeah.
Show off that fine piece of apparel, please. Seán told us he'd never seen that before, that image.
I'm sorry that I didn't have internet in my house when you did. And that's...
I think it's...
You said that you saw it on Bebo.
I did.
I didn't have Bebo because we didn't have internet. So...
But you the internet at other places, surely.
I feel like this is just...
When did you get internet in your house?
I think it was like 14, 15.
Really?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah. We didn't have... Well, we had a computer when I was like 10 or 11.
Okay.
But we just played games on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you go, that's cool.
Mm-hmm.
When did you get internet?
As long as I can remember.
Yeah, I'm
we
the
had
same.
internet in our house.
Yeah. Anyway, enough about that. We can talk about that t-shirt all day. Speaking of brothers, I guess.
Look out for them.
Speaking of, if you see the world police warn a brother, Trump has doubled down on his comments on Zelenskyy being a dictator, and everyone's gone mental. Mm-hmm. Everyone's gone absolutely apoplectic. Europe is unifying. Trump is saying just incredible things about democracy in Ukraine.
Can you imagine what the compromat is that Putin has on this guy? It must be insane. For
Here
some
are
of the
your
things that
lines.
he's coming out with.
Yeah.
He's like, just a reminder, we still have that video.
Yeah.
We still have everything.
The piss video, the prostitute piss video.
Yeah.
Was that
Yeah,
it?
they have something worse now.
Oh God, what could it be? What did we make of Trump's comments?
I mean, there is an irony in the US president who tried to overturn a democratic election and Vladimir Putin calling Zelenskyy a dictator.
Yep.
It's like the doublespeak that we were talking about that's come to really define the Trump era of politics.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting as well, being like, well, they haven't had an election. You should have an election on our terms. The two guys who love elections.
Yeah.
It's because if they did concede and Zelenskyy did call an election, the candidate, I wonder who'd win.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing.
Well,
I
he's
think
banned all the political parties, so he'd won.
Yeah. The Kremlin man.
He's just like calling their bluff. He's like, yeah, sure. Fine. My party is the only one that can run in the election, though.
Putinsky might win.
Putinsky.
I think that it's just that Trump is annoyed that Zelenskyy doesn't want to play the game that him and Vladimir Putin are playing. And I think Trump might genuinely think that he is negotiating with Russia, whereas in actuality what's happening is he's, turning over and showing his stomach to them, because Russia aren't making any concessions. They're getting everything they want. And Trump parroting Kremlin lines about Zelenskyy is just exactly what, like, Russia couldn't have a better day than they're having today.
Mm-hmm. I think it's interesting in that Trump, if you consider like the three biggest powers in the world are China, Russia, USA. At the moment, Russia and China are much closer to each other than either of them are to the USA, probably as a result of this conflict. And if the bigger threat to the USA is China in terms of like market, literally in terms of economy, like they could all, if they were able to sell like their electric cars, like all the tech infrastructure that they have in China, that's a real threat to like American economic hegemony. Russia has nothing.
Yeah.
Absolutely, like zero to offer economically. What they do offer is a really like just kind of like a bull in a china shop approach to international relations. And if they can neuter that, then that leaves America free to like rampage
But
economically
that's
at the
kind of-
cost of liberalism in Europe.
That's already kind of the case. I mean, since the war began, there's kind of been this shift. It could 2 years ago, it wasn't necessarily the case that Russia didn't have anything to offer to Europe because it had gas, right? You had Nord Stream 2 being built. You had the entire gas infrastructure of Europe was reliant on Russia. In the 6 months after the war, there was this massive turnaround in how the European powers got their gas. Italy had a big regenerative project where they installed so many LNG terminals in the country. It's been the same across the continent. So it is interesting that we've now had that transition where Russia is effectively a lame duck. Like there's nothing that it can offer. America has won. And so it does kind of like, outside of the thing of Trump trying to maintain the attention economy and things like that, it is really difficult to see what he's trying to do. He's not necessarily an ally of Putin, you know? Like I said it kind of glibly earlier on of like the compromat thing, but it's kind of, what is it that he's trying to get from Putin by playing to his tune?
I think is it a values thing? Is it like?
It could well be.
It's a realignment of the international order. If you talk about like the liberal European order was basically based on like American values in like the 40s and 50s, and like with like the Marshall Plan and the rebuilding of Europe. Those values no longer align with Trump's America's foreign policy. So he's trying to reconfigure the international sphere as to be. He feels much closer aligned to like Putin's contempt for international norms than he does for like EU rules.
Yeah,
it's hard though, because I wonder if like even in the 40s and 50s, when you talk about the rules-based order, like was it ever the case that American foreign policy was ever altruistic towards smaller states, or was it just that they could impose this international law when it was useful to them, but ignore it when it wasn't? And now like Trump's foreign policy is almost just like, well, the US has always been behaving like this, and now it's just like mask off. I'm just going to admit that we are.
Yeah.
There's something quite like depressing about that.
but I mean, it's kind of their strategy with everything under Trump, you know, whether it's first term or this term. I was talking to Ilan Pape a couple of weeks ago about his comments on Gaza, and he made the point that actually if Kamala Harris had won the election, the exact same thing would be happening in terms of the United States involvement in the Middle East, in particular in the West Bank and Gaza. It would just not be an explicit conversation that's had out in the open. Whereas with Trump, what is the material difference in how America is treating Ukraine outside of, under the Democrats, you kind of had this thing of, I was reading a couple of days ago that when it came to European aid, it was aid and it was going to be paid back. With America, it was never arranged that the loans, or not loans, because it wasn't going to be paid back, or it wasn't formalized that anything was going to be paid back. So Trump comes in, and rather than having a back channel conversation of, well, we're going to have to take over your cathedral here, we're going to make the McDonald's cathedral or whatever, he just out in the open does American expansionism for everyone to see, you know? So it is kind of like, it feels more of an attention grab than any tangible shift away from what America does. Like to your point, in the 40s, 50s, 60s, during the Cold War, it was never a thing of empowering other nation states to be their own, to kind of make themselves flourish on the world stage. It was all on the conditions of the American empire, you know?
And I think during that Trump speech, you really saw like his ego come to play in foreign policy, where he was saying that, where he said, I have the power to end this war. And you really saw like his eyes light up at that fact. But Ollie raised a really interesting point in the office about Trump's motivations towards Zelenskyy, which was that obviously the first time around in his presidency, Zelenskyy refused to hand over information about Hunter Biden. And then Ollie was like, maybe this is really just petty ego.
Fuck me.
I know, but I saw, did you see, in the long rambling Truth Social post that Trump did, when he called Zelenskyy a moderately successful comedian, I just found that really funny.
I'm a big star.
I saw his show, wasn't very good.
Couldn't understand a word of it.
The ratings were bad.
To go back to what you were saying, Seán, about what is the material difference if Harris has won. I don't think Harris would have emboldened the autocratic sphere of international relations. As in, like, now you'll have other states looking to, if they're looking for American support in something else, what's the biggest way to do that is, or a route to do that, to be like, yeah, you are right, Zelensky is a dictator. There's further ramifications we haven't seen yet of, like, I don't, obviously it's because this happened this week. Obviously we don't know what's going to happen.
Sure.
But I think like there will be greater knock-on effects down the line of how people align themselves, whether that's with Trump and Putin and like the autocratic sphere, or
But I mean, you
the
can do
illiberal
both.
sphere.
You can do both.
You can do both.
Stammer and Macron are going to the White House next week, and they're not going to go over there to wring Trump's hands. They're going over there to grovel to him, despite the fact that they're sat here today and yesterday evening talking about how much they disagree with him. So you can speak out, but like in international diplomacy, they speak out both sides of the mouth all the time.
But it's a choice, isn't it? As in, we're yet to see what happens. I'm not like, they could get on their knees and grovel, but I do think that would have really quite. That would be kryptonite domestically, surely, for Starmer. Like, it's actually what we've spoken so much about Trump. That's actually kind of what I wanted to talk about, was how the UK politicians are reacting to this. Like support for Zelensky in the UK is like 64% favourable. Like, it's like people in this country are very, very pro-Ukraine, and I think any disalignment with that would be really bad for any politician, particularly a prime minister. Like, that's Boris Johnson's like the one thing people say about what Boris Johnson did well is Ukraine.
Yes, and he was defending it yesterday as well, and saying that. He had an interesting take on what Donald Trump is doing. He was saying basically Donald Trump doesn't mean what he's saying. He's saying this is a sort of wake-up call to Europe to make Europe increase its defense spending, which I guess he is, but it is quite a strange way of framing it. Is kind of letting Trump off the hook for some of the...
Because he wants the speaking invites
on
the RNC circuit. I think there's also as well an interesting break, perhaps, with like the political right in this country as well, and what people at large think. Like, Ken Badenoch came out and kind of condemned Trump's comments about Zelensky, but was also praising Donald Trump at the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship conference, which you were reporting from. What a dreadful title that is, by the way. It is so... It doesn't mean anything.
I think that is... So I was there.
Yeah.
The people that I spoke to didn't seem to really understand what it meant either.
Shall we quickly try to define what it is for the audience?
TLDR, it's...
Different,
wrong channel.
PoliticsJOE.
It is NatCon for more Christian people and people who are not necessarily sure how far right they are.
They think they might be.
Yes. Yeah. So, no, they know that they're right wing,
right,
economically and socially. They're not sure how far along the line they are.
That's quite funny.
It's so strange. Like, number one thing was, I mean, you might be able to attest to this better than me because you've been at NatCon and other events, but there were like no English people there. I was there for 4 hours trying to get Vox Pops, moving all around the XL Centre because it's a very big place. And out of everybody that I asked, I'd say a good 90% of the people that I approached were not from the UK. They were American, a lot of German people as well. I spoke to a guy from Nigeria. So there was like European right-wingers, American right-wingers, and the demographic as well of the English people that were there were retirees. Yeah. By and large, retired people. So it's just a very, very weird mix of people.
I wonder if the thing with ARC versus NatCon and PopCon is ARC is run by Jordan Peterson. So probably has like NatCon and PopCon are about like conservatism in the UK.
Yeah.
So maybe less useful to take time off work to go and hear Jordan Peterson and Big Sue's rattle on. If like audience, you don't know the actress who plays Sophie Winkleman, who is also Claudia Winkleman's half sister.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And plays Big Sue's in Peep Show, and she's also in, I think she's in 2.5 Men.
Is she?
Yeah, like in the Ashton Kutcher seasons. Anyway, but you could go to this conference and hear them wax lyrical about net zero.
Her speech was very funny. It was about why we shouldn't have iPads in classrooms, just for 15 minutes of like, yeah, it's melting your brain. Like you need to start flexing that muscle. Let's go back to chalk and blackboard. Like,
and the whole conference seemed just really confused from what you've been saying, from the speeches I watched on YouTube that they released. And their website describes ARC as a global meeting to halt the perceived decline in Western culture, which, did you feel like that was, they were halting it, they were managing to achieve that?
What decline is interesting.
I thought that was interesting. They're like, it's not actually in decline, guys.
Sure, this is really happening. Like they're completely on the other side now, where they're like, actually, the last 5 years, maybe we got a bit out of hand. Now we're just going to make sure that we were correct in the first place.
For our careers, benefits us massively to sell books.
Yeah.
If you think there's a decline in Western values, but that's a really interesting thing. You booked the Excel Centre. Yeah.
Exactly.
Have some alarm.
Exactly.
Have encouraging prediction.
This is the thing. There didn't seem to be any alarm about it at all. It seemed to be like a thinking, you know?
Right.
Like there were fringe events around it and all this kind of thing, but excuse me. The people that I spoke to did have that unifying line of the decline in Western values and Western civilization. When asked what those things were, they weren't able to, not a thing, like not immigration. The one English person that I spoke to was the only person that said immigration was one of the things that was triggering the decline of Western civilization. Everyone else was kind of there to say, I'm just here to listen to the ideas. You know, it was very, to take a week out of your time to go to London to listen to ideas I'm not in that world, so I don't know. But like
the Danish guy you met, what was it?
So Thomas was his name. He told me Thomas.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, Thomas, like Saint Thomas.
Right.
Yeah, he very much was a doubting Thomas. Actually, he said that. He said this off camera before we start rolling, that his friend recommended for him to come. And also he had been in the UK for NatCon, also on the recommendation of this friend of his. And but it was like, he was actually on his way to the airport when I was chatting to him. And he was like, look, by and large, I've enjoyed this, but it doesn't really have like a cohesive message. So Thomas was basically saying that he was actually funniest talking about Jordan Peterson, again off camera, where he said he rushed from the airport to get in for day one, sits down, gets a great seat for Jordan Peterson's keynote speech, and he was like, I have no fucking idea what this guy has been saying for the last 20 minutes. And I think it's quite it's a very interesting way to look at the entire conference itself, is that it began with this word soup of kind of buzzwords on the right and kind of the emerging Christian right as well. And it kind of carried on like that. Like there was like even people like, as you say, Big Suze was at it, Douglas Murray was at it. I just love just calling her Big Suze instead of her actual name. But yeah, even Kemi Badenoch as well. You know, it's like this thing.
Farage was there as well.
Farage was there. Kind of a strange matchup, him and Jordan Peterson. But yeah, I guess we can talk about Farage later. But like Kemi Badenoch as well, kind of having this, as you said, pro-Trump stance. Trump is like revolutionizing the way the conservative world thinks, yada, yada, yada. But also this kind of, I suppose, consistent with recent speeches she's had, this thing of like liberalism isn't dead or dying. It's just that we've been weak. And the same question remains from any other speech she's had. You were in the governing party. You've only known government. You are calling yourself weak. Where is the self-reflect? Like, are you going to come here and say, this is what we did wrong? But it's not, you know?
Look, there's a disconnect, isn't there, between the way politicians on the right speak about Trump and how the UK at large think about Trump. Why do you think that Badenoch and people like, well, Reform in general, tie themselves to Trump, kind of despite popular opinion about Trump in the UK. Like, for instance, 22% of people in the UK have a favourable opinion about Donald Trump.
I wonder if actually people like Farage, Kemi Badenoch, and also Tony Abbott, the former Australian Prime Minister, maybe felt like they had made a mistake in attending ARC, or not a mistake, but they felt a bit, what have I gotten myself into? Because we saw how disaligned they were from this sort of American pseudo-intellectual right that was full of like fire and brimstone preachers and anti-IVF
Holy shit.
yeah, anti-IVF campaign groups, anti-abortion campaign groups. I wonder if they felt misaligned, especially Tony Abbott, who came out quite strongly against Trump calling Zelenskyy a dictator. And if you haven't seen that clip of him that he gave at ARC, I would suggest watching that because it's really quite damning. And I think you saw during the Nigel Farage and Jordan Peterson, it was meant to be an interview, but it wasn't an interview.
No, it was meant to be a conversation even. Like, it was like a fireside chat.
The way that it begins is like, they're sitting on stage and you think, oh, normally, you know, you sit down and Jordan Peterson would be like, I'm here with Nigel Farage, he's the leader of Reform, a little intro, and then they get into the conversation. No. Jordan Peterson rants for about 10 minutes about net zero and then just turns and looks at Farage, no introduction, no nothing. And it's left to Farage to like introduce himself. And then throughout the conversation, they both are just kind of saying to each other, yeah, I don't understand the science. I've tried to read the papers, but I don't understand the science.
I mean, the most fringe it gets is like at one point, Farage and Peterson are like, CO2 is not destroying the planet. But then caveating that with, I don't really get climate science, but I guess CO2 isn't killing the planet. Don't quote me on that, but this might be the thing.
Carl Daniel in an interstellar prison.
But it's also like, there's another point in the interview fireside chat, where Jordan Peterson starts to kind of try and wedge in the conversation of traditional family values and like the importance of the heterosexual nuclear family and all this kind of thing. And Nigel Farage is kind of just sat there. Like the whole time he looks so uncomfortable.
He's sitting like how he sat on the This Morning couch when the dragon was like walking behind him.
He like his response is just, well, I wouldn't really know much about like the nuclear traditional heterosexual family. I'm twice divorced. I'm not really, that's not my bag.
Oh.
Oh no. Where's the next question? Starts crying on the spot. But it is really interesting, that contrast between where the UK is in terms of its right-wing ideology and where America is, where North America is, and kind of where Europe is starting to get to. It seems like the UK is maybe an election cycle away from this.
That's what is interesting, is that Reform are obviously doing incredibly well at the moment, but they are still kind of polling in the 20% kind of thing. And obviously in first past the post, anything could happen. That could mean any number of seats. But are we starting to see what undoes Reform? Is there actual misalignment? Like, they are such a new type of right wing that the country hasn't really caught up. Like, you saw, and did we see Julia Hartley-Brewer interviewing Richard Tice?
I didn't.
Oh my God, she ripped him a new one about Ukraine. If you are getting like normies to cheer on Julia Hartley-Brewer in a conversation,
you're in trouble.
She rips him apart.
Really?
And I think that is the danger of it. And it's him like. She's like part of the argument. She said at one point, I thought Reform were in favour of sovereignty. Like all these, it is, and it's a pretty astonishing clip. And part of the problem is Tice's like almost instinctive kowtowing to Trump is doing nothing wrong. And I think it's the danger of what we certainly see it with like Kemi being like, she just looks on Twitter and talks about whatever Tories online are talking about. I wonder if there is a danger of like this new insurgent far right, their actual ideas, not instincts, but their actual ideas and solutions about like the new world order or what society should look like we are not downstream of that yet. Like if a normal person, if someone who wants to vote for Farage, like say like even one of his constituents, somebody happily voted for him last election, would vote for him in the next election. If they heard him having a conversation about the failure of heteronormative family values, like what the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah.
And stuff like that. Everyone says it like Farage probably has quite a low ceiling, and things like this might just bring it lower.
I think. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think there is a danger of reform just importing too much of the American debate and trying to put it onto the British context and it not quite working. Because, for example, at the last reform thing that Ava and I went to, Rupert Lowe and Nigel Farage were talking about DEI for like 20 minutes. And I was just like, I think no one cares. They're losing the audience. Like DEI, like even that phrasing itself feels like quite an American business phrasing.
I actually think the term Britain is different.
Yeah.
I think it's diversity, inclusion, and equality.
Yeah, so I was like, it felt really strange. And at the same time, they were still really kowtowing to Elon Musk. And I think because they think young people think Elon Musk is cool. And Nigel Farage actually said so much to us. But when we were going and speaking to young people that were attending, and we're like, asking about Musk and kind of why they were there. They weren't there because they liked Musk. They were there because they liked Nigel. And I think so it's kind of a mistake to think that you need to necessarily ride on their coattails as much as you are.
Yeah, trust in your own sauce. Did you see? I sent it to you guys earlier, but I don't know if you saw what the James McMurdoch tweet today.
Yeah.
I see that.
That fight he's having with Zara Sultana.
Yeah.
It's one of the funniest tweets I've ever seen. So for context, James McMurdoch, the Reform MP, the one who sneaked through vetting because he was convicted of assaulting his then girlfriend outside a nightclub. Zara Sultana said, "Aren't you the guy who was convicted of assaulting his then girlfriend outside a nightclub?" And he said
no.
He said no, which isn't true. But then he said a big list of
mistake.
And he said like a big list of his like life stories, a very like LinkedIn post. One of which was, "I was the treasurer of the university rugby club." Which is,
I can't be a bad guy.
I can't be the
Clubs and societies.
Treat me with some respect. I was the treasurer of the University of Sussex Rugby Club. It's the most like, please behave with some sort of like dignity as an MP. I think he's abandoned all dignity.
Yeah, you're asking for too much.
No, I think I am. But if not embarrassed as an adult. This man is 40. He's being like, I think you'll find I was the treasurer. That's
It's so
2007.
strange seeing them beefing Labour MPs on Twitter just because they have nothing to do for a week. Like,
This is recess.
it's so strange. Like it's just very unbecoming, you know. Like what is the point?
Unbecoming.
What is the point of what you're getting at here, you know? But on the point of if this has cut through or if this is damaging the Reform Party, I think it's also the case that this isn't what people are looking to reform for. No. That like they don't necessarily care that they're attending things like this, whether it's ARC or whether it's their position on Ukraine. I think for them to go to an event like this is less to do with their alignment with the ideology of the North American right, more to do with schmoozing the money makers backing that.
Agreed.
You know,
that's a good point.
Yeah.
I mean, on a very base level, of course, like it could come to a point where they're like, okay, we have a substantial enough membership. Let's start drip feeding some of this. But I don't think that that's where their loyalties lie. Their loyalties lie more in, I mean, their manifesto in the election was all about fracking, like unlocking the potential of the UK. So I think it's all to do. It's their attendance at these things are more to do with that and the traditional family and the anti-IVF and the anti-abortion are all secondary to it. And you could try and pin it on them, but with a leader like Farage, you know, he's been a figurehead of the British right for however long, and during that time he's worked at RT. He's done all sorts of things that traditionally you wouldn't think a British voter would care about or would care about. But look at him now. He's an elected MP.
Yeah.
You know?
I wonder if his case of is he just Teflon? And because someone made the point, being pro-Russia, like that was something that, or being accused, of being pro-Russia, like the Putin candidate, that kind of undid Jeremy Corbyn. So it's not, I think it's not even like, it's not the pro or anti-Ukraineness. It's the pro or anti-Russia. I think people view Putin rightly as quite a vicious, aggressive dictator. And so if opponents to Farage and Reform can successfully paint them as like puppets of the Kremlin, that might be quite a dangerous thing to be for them electorally.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I guess with the Corbyn side of it, there are policies to go along with it, like nuclear disarmament, right?
Yeah.
Which I guess would have more cut through with the electorate than I think that Putin is kind of a good guy. He's a strong leader, blah, blah, blah. And it kind of just being that's just my opinion. It's not like, as it stands, Reform's policy isn't, I think we're going to recognize Ukraine as part of the Russian satellite states, like it's not gotten to that point yet. So I think it's very easy for them to bat it off,
Slippery slope. You never know.
Yeah, you don't.
Have we got anything else?
I mean, if you want to touch on the last bit or no?
We can. Should we have Yes. Last bit.
Okay, so Simon Hart, who was the chief whip in Rishi Sunak's premiership, has published some of his diaries in the Times of some of the things that he had to deal with as chief whip. And I think the biggest, most entertaining possibly for us discovery is that Mark Mingus wasn't the only Conservative MP to be held hostage during a sexual encounter.
Imagine my shock.
And he has written like a script of the phone call that took place between himself and the unnamed 2019 intake MP.
Should we guess? Yeah. It is like, so the quotes from this.
They're insane.
I met a woman as I left the Carlton Club who offered me a drink, but I now think she is a KGB agent. She wants £500 and has left me in a room with 12 naked women and a CCTV. What the fuck? Like, there was the sentiment around this when it was like published yesterday was like, isn't this funny? I was like, I think this is absolutely atrocious. Yeah. Like, this is absolutely.
The fact that it hasn't just happened once but twice is insane.
Yeah.
But then
we've got another one.
They sent a taxi to the chief whip, Simon Hart, sent a taxi to go and pick this guy up from the brothel in Bayswater that he was being held hostage in. But rather than getting into that taxi, he says he gets into a different taxi driven by an Afghan agent called Ahmed, who demanded £3,000 for a blowjob.
It's the going rate these days.
What kind of? But why would an Afghan agent? Why would that be his?
I don't know. Why is he also a prostitute? And also, what crap day for that MP?
What if it's just a wholesome evening with the boys? These 29 intake Tory MPs are all sat in their dorm, and the loser of the card game has to ring up Simon Hart.
It's all prank. It's all prank.
Yeah.
Another thing says, among today's HR joys is the report that a departmental spad went to an orgy over the weekend and ended up taking a crap on another person's head. To make matters worse, in a separate incident, a house employee went to a party dressed as Jimmy Savile and ended up having sex with a blow-up doll, for which she has been subsequently dismissed. Like, this is I feel like I'm pearl clutching, but I think this is appropriate pearl clutching. Like, this is like ludicrous that these people they have like legislative power. They were in charge.
Mm-hmm.
They were in charge. Why are you? Somebody's pooing on someone. Why is he in Parliament?
The way that Simon Hart ends that story with just another day in the office, I guess.
Some of it's like there's some quite revealing parts about MPs.
Yeah, especially about Suella Braverman.
Yeah. On a reshuffle day, Simon Hart writes, one lucky cabinet appointee is less grateful than the promotion deserves and more entitled than professionals should be when selected by the PM for high office. Let's all agree one thing, says the PM. She's fucking useless, but we can't get rid of her. Who could that possibly be about? And then also, Kemi pops in for a chat about trans stuff. I try, but I cannot find a mutually usable wavelength. She's another one who lives in a permanent state of outrage. It must be so tiring. I think it's like those are quite useful assessments of conservative politicians.
The book, or the diaries, which are being put into a book, really do feel like Simon Hart had quite a miserable time being chief whip, and now he's got nothing to lose and is
100%.
like seeking revenge almost.
Also, kind of Sunak must have had a really crap time.
Yeah.
If you're trying to like save this government, and this is the hand you've been dealt, like you'd be like, guys, I'm trying my best, but please, we'll stop shagging like
the way
multiple people shitting on everyone.
The way he talks about Sunak is actually like quite sweet. Like he's like, I like basically that story with the KGB agent and stuff. He's like, I tried to tell Rishi Sunak about this, but he simply doesn't believe that people behave like this.
Imagine at work. So why is Seán not
at the desk?
Why is Seán not on the podcast today? Oh, so Megan from HR had to get him out of a brothel. he owes Megan thousands of pounds because he was ensnared by a prostitute.
By 15 Russian
It is
agents.
like it is. This is obviously like really funny stuff, but it just shouldn't be happening in a professional body. Like we all know people who work in Parliament. Imagine working for these people.
I wonder if they're like this before they get elected, or if something about being in Westminster with the power encourages them to act.
Yeah,
like this.
it emboldens. Or
It's that.
It has to
Do you
be
think
that.
it's that,
Yeah.
or do you think that people that seek to be MPs already have those tendencies in them?
It's probably mutual. It's probably complementary, isn't it? It's like you probably have like wanting to be an MP is mental anyway, or like you're seeking out some level of like deciding that you should be the person who has the powers, but it's like an unusual trait.
Yeah.
Anyway, and then you're put into this environment where you're given these opportunities. People are looking. You have influence. People are looking to influence you. You have all this free time, cheap drinks, whatever. It's probably it'd be quite hard to remain normal in that. Like, I personally would remain absolutely normal. And everyone knows that. But like, just suddenly being like, I wonder what the person who was shagging a prostitute after leaving the Carlton Club was like before in his previous career. Like,
Just a pencil pusher in the civil
honestly,
service or
like,
something.
What do you? You're put in these situations of like, and also like this. They probably have a much better social life than like your average British adult. Like you are socializing every night of the week.
I think because as well most of them live away from their homes in London from like Monday to Thursday, and then there's evening events every night. You could be out every night if you wanted. It is what you're saying. They probably have more access to behave like this.
And because so much of it is like networking, I guess, as well. Like you wouldn't just like, what are you doing after work? Oh, I'm going to the gym, going to make dinner, watch a film. It's like, oh,
I'm going to a brothel in days later.
well, actually, me and the boys from Harrow, we're like 10 MPs or whatever. We're going to do cocaine and have some sex with some prostitutes. And also, we'd like you to be in our faction. Are you in? Yeah, I'm in. Here we go. Ugh, what? I'd be curious. I think other whips should publish their diaries as well.
As a comparison.
Yeah. Like the Ulster MPs would be fascinating.
I wonder what they get up to while they're in London. I feel like they're in bed by 9.
No, it's boys away.
Huh?
Boys away from home.
I don't think so. Especially the Jim Shannons of the world. I think someone like him.
Sammy
is.
Wilson.
I don't know. He has the look of a party goer, but I think
does.
he's like 6-7 o'clock time to
loose
I think
tie.
he wears like one of those, those like screw sets.
Let us know in the comments what you think about Sammy Wilson's pajamas. What do you think he wears to bed? Thank you very much, everyone, for listening. I enjoyed. Someone posted a meme in the subreddit, which for the first time in what feels like quite a long time.
Keep doing that.
Yeah. We love the memes.
Do it again.
There was a real spate of good ones, and I think it was. Yeah, it's a meme in which I'm presented as the Chad, so that's maybe why I like it. But just more memes in general, please. If you haven't been to subreddit, it's at r/PoliticsJOE. Have you got anything else you'd like to say?
No.
Make sure to like and subscribe wherever you
Watch Seán's Reform.
Oh
video.
yeah, watch Seán's.
Oh yeah, it's not out yet, but it might be out soon.
It might be. Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that. Cool. We will see you all next week.